Elsewhere, the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, is going to present his first budget this afternoon. This is less than 1 month into the job, and it's expected that he'll be looking at extra financial help for individuals and businesses if measures against the virus meant that they were out of pocket. And this all comes as a sixth person died from the virus in the UK. We now have a total of 382 cases. The government are saying that they're constantly reviewing the response to the outbreak, but the UK hasn't yet moved to the next stage of dealing with the virus. The NHS has announced a major increase in its testing capabilities. There have been close to 120,000 cases now around the world, with more than 4,000 people dying. But just to put that into context, almost 66,000 people have already recovered. Those stats, by the way, are from Johns Hopkins University. We're going to be in Downing Street shortly, but first we're going to hear from someone who has had the virus. Carl Goldman and his wife Terry were on board the cruise ship, the Diamond Princess, in Japan last month. He's been in quarantine for around 30 days now, and he spoke to me earlier.
We headed to Tokyo on January 17th, boarded the Diamond Princess January 20th, had a 15-day wonderful cruise of our 16 days. And on the last day, after we'd already packed our bags, they announced that a passenger who had gotten off at Hong Kong had come down with the coronavirus. They had found 10 passengers with fevers, and then later it was confirmed those 10 had the virus.
And when did you find out, when did you test positive personally?
Our friends who were with us, the husband, Mark, is a double kidney transplant, so he was one of the at-risk patients. So the doctors decided to test him, and then when they came back with the test results, he was negative, but his wife was positive. By then, there were already about 300 passengers and crew who had been taken off the Diamond Princess with the virus. That number now is over 700, and we've had 7 deaths, and I hear a report there may have been an 8th death as well. So we got swabs taken. Those results trailed me, but I was positive at that time. That result came back, but with no symptoms, feeling fine. 2 days later, the State Department here in the United States and the U.S. Embassy figured out that they better evacuate all the Americans. Finally boarded 2 747s. I was still feeling fine, fell asleep. 2 hours later, I woke up and was very flush, knew I had a fever, and the doctor confirmed it. It was a fever of well over 103 Fahrenheit, but it was a very high fever. And what's weird about this virus is there were no other symptoms. So unlike a cold or the flu, there was no sore throat, there was no headache, no sneezing, no sniffling, no stuffiness, no body aches. The only other thing I ended up having was a very dry cough that stayed with me a long time, for weeks.
You returned to the States and you were taken to this medical isolation unit. It's in Nebraska. Can you tell us a little bit about it and what life is like in there?
Sure. I was put into a biocontainment area. It's very weird. It's feels like I'm inside a fishbowl. I was in there for 10 days, and then as my body stabilized and they realized I wasn't going to be at risk anymore, I got moved to a lower level of care. But the biocontainment area had, everything was sealed off. So I had windows with double panes and chicken wire in between it, and 2 cameras on me at all times, hooked up to monitors.
Just finally, can you give any advice for anybody who is having to spend time in quarantine and in isolation? How do you cope with it? How do you pass the time? How do you cope with not being able to be in the same room as your wife, for example?
Yeah, I look at this with making lemonade out of lemons, taking it out of one day at a time, realizing that this is out of my control. I have started, back in the days of the Diamond Princess quarantine, I started a daily journal on our website. We own the local radio station in a suburban town north of Los Angeles. So I started writing a daily journal on hometownstation.com and showed the humorous side of this as well as the tragic side.
That's Carl Goldman there, who's been in isolation in Nebraska after contracting coronavirus on the cruise ship, the Diamond Princess. Now, Health Minister and Conservative MP Nadine Dorries has been diagnosed with coronavirus, and our political correspondent Nick Eardley joins us. Good morning, Nick. What more do we know
Morning, Jeff.
About Nadine?
We had a tweet from Nadine Dorries last night, just really explaining the situation. She says she's feeling all right, she's self-isolating. She's actually a bit more worried about her 84-year-old mum who's staying with her. But just to kind of talk you through how we got here, she started to feel a bit funny on Friday. She got tested, and that test came back on Monday as positive. What happens now is that Public Health England will try and trace everybody that she's been in contact with over the last few days to see whether they need to self-isolate as well. It's a pretty big deal in Westminster because Nadine Dorries is an MP who'll be wandering around the Houses of Parliament quite regularly. Not only that, but because she's a minister, she has pretty senior access to other ministers as well. In fact, on Thursday last week, she was at a function in Number 10 for International Women's Day with the Prime Minister. Now, we don't know exactly how serious this is all going to be and whether you might have to see some MPs, potentially some ministers taking a few days off now to self-isolate as well. But look, this is the first case in Westminster, so I suspect there'll be a few people who will be watching closely what happens over the next few days and whether Parliament starts to take extra measures. I don't think Parliament is going to be shut down at the moment. There's a real reluctance to do that among most MPs. But there is that feeling that maybe there might need to be a few extra measures now.
And do we know where she is at the moment?
She's at home, so she's self-isolating, as everybody's told to do when they get the virus or think they might have it or have many of the symptoms and have been somewhere that there's been a big outbreak. You're basically told to stay at home. That's what she's doing at the moment, and I suspect she'll be there for the next few days, so I don't think we'll see her. But her Twitter feed, as I say, she was posting last night saying that things haven't been ideal, obviously, but she thinks she's over the worst of it now.
All right, Nick Eardley, thank you. The Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, is going to be presenting his first budget this afternoon. It's less than a month into the job. Sean Farrington's here from Wake Up to Money. Just thinking about how, already, that's a lot on somebody who's new to a job to deliver the annual budget, and then something like coronavirus comes along and you have to make changes. I guess a lot of pressure and a lot of late nights in the Treasury.
Yes, and you'd imagine sort of right across the civil service one way or another, because starting with the Chancellor, who's obviously going to be delivering the budget today, but all of those changes, they all take a lot of discussion and approval behind the scenes. So late nights, all-nighters. I mean, that's often the way with the budget anyway, but you would imagine the last week or two have been particularly sort of fraught to figure out what exactly is needed, because part of the problem, what we also hear with the budget today, is how the economy is doing. The Office of Budget Responsibility puts out forecasts and gives us an idea of how the economy is getting on, and the Chancellor will base a lot of his maths around, right, what's the country up to? But a lot of those forecasts now really are just out the window, because the maths will have been done before coronavirus has kicked in. We don't really know, as we're hearing on Wake Up to Money, the actual economic effect number-wise. We know it anecdotally, because every business I'm speaking to at the minute is taking a hit one way or another, having to deal with the outbreak of coronavirus, whether it's just consumer demand and people not going to restaurants, whether it's events being cancelled, and meaning all the money that's gone into that just goes out of the window. You're not able to commit sales, you're not able to do deals around the world, you're not able to import things from China that you would have been able to. So all of those things are building up to an economic hit, and the problem with that is if the economy hugely slows down or goes into heading towards a recession, if it gets smaller, a recession is when the economy shrinks for 2 consecutive 3-month periods in a row. But if we're starting to get onto those kind of conversations, then we're not paying as much tax, and the Chancellor doesn't have as much money to play with.
So what are we expecting today then?
Well, it's we thought it was going to be a budget all about infrastructure, didn't we, before coronavirus came along? So there's still going to be a fair bit about that increased spending and infrastructure spending like we've not seen for many decades is the plan. But it's really going to be remembered as a coronavirus budget. So it's what are we going to hear from the Chancellor about how can he help businesses out there? And, you know, in Wake Up to Money, the businesses were suggesting, can I get hold of interest-free loans? Can I see the Chancellor make finance a bit more readily available? Maybe delays in VAT payments, business rate payments, adjustments to national insurance thresholds. So if the threshold is raised or the rate is reduced at all, and just anything that just gives businesses a tiny bit of help here or there, it all helps to help them survive. Because what a lot of businesses are saying is, you know, your instinctive thing might be, I'll lay off a few people, I need to cost cut. But this is only a short-term thing, relatively, coronavirus, even if it goes on for many, many months. Businesses aren't thinking, well, if I get rid of people now, I'm going to need them again in several months' time. So how do they get through the next few months? And so, you sort of look at what's making a few of the headlines today. The front of the Financial Times is signalling the end of austerity with a massive leap in borrowing. So budget benefits for the NHS. The NHS is going to have extra things to deal with in the next few months, so money there. We heard Rishi Sunak say on Sunday the NHS will have what it needs. That costs money. More money for infrastructure. Starts softening on the deficit, which is the amount we borrow each year. There's definitely a change in tune there that we're used to over the last decade. We're going to borrow more.
Is there any precedent for a budget like this? I mean, it's a sort of comparable national, sort of hesitant to use the word crisis, but I mean, to some extent, it's that.
We've had emergency budgets, often when, after when the coalition Bush government came in 2010, right off the back of a financial crisis, there was a new budget pretty quickly after that new government had formed that we weren't used to, and we saw huge austerity put in place, massive spending cuts right across government, and then we saw local authorities right around the country having to react to all of that. So it's not unusual for a budget to have to deal with a crisis. I think what is unusual is we didn't have a budget last year in 2019 because of all the shenanigans. We don't really know how the economy is going to kick on in the next few weeks and months. Whereas in the financial crisis, it was all so doom and gloom. It was quite clear what the decision needed to be. What's difficult for Rishi Sunak today is, does he plough a load of money in now to help businesses right now? But could he afford to keep those promises going for months on end if that's what's required? And it's not just about government involvement with helping businesses and individuals survive financially in the few weeks. So banks pitching in with mortgage holidays is the headline in the Times today. People being allowed, if they are affected by coronavirus, to maybe delay payments there. Business loans, banks are giving the talk that they're there for businesses, but we have heard in the past that, and it's materialised that businesses can't quite get the finance that they need, which is why we might hear the government say a bit more on that today.
All right, thanks, Sean. It's 18 minutes past 6.
First for news and the best live sport.